there'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston.
Police discovered a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead.
It was clearly a very violent, cold-blooded killing.
It was scary, not something you expect to happen on your doorstep.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
We thought, is this to do with this gang-related thing? They'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the heart of the Lincolnshire countryside is the thriving market town of Boston.
Boston's a town that's steeped in history. At one stage it was second largest port in the UK to Liverpool. You've got such things as the Guild Hall.
We've got a nice Boston stamp. It's a big church, which is very beautiful architecture. You can see from anywhere. If you get lost, just to look for a Boston stamp.
Because it's rural, you've got plenty of nice open spaces. And then you've got a town with local people in it, local trades.
It was a small village and now it's a town. And they're very lovely people, very laid back. They have a very Bostonian humour about them.
Anybody that comes past, it's always good morning. It's not like city life where they just ignore each other.
No, we'll be sat on the doorstep having a cup of tea. An old woman or someone comes past, you're like, all right, good morning.
Yeah, you don't know him from Adam, but you just say good morning.
Yeah.
With its surrounding farmland, Boston has long been a draw for those looking for work.
Boston is essentially the vegetable breadbasket of the United Kingdom. About a third of the fresh fruit and vegetable comes from that area in the whole of the UK.
Farmers need, packhouses need X amount of casual labour. Boston doesn't hold that amount of casual labour, so that labour has to come in from elsewhere. And that's always been the case all the way back.
In recent years, the town has been transformed by the arrival of workers from across Europe.
Boston's changed incredibly over the last 20 years with the migration from the European Union. It's had the highest amount of migration for anywhere in the country. The first wave came from Portugal, but gradually as more Eastern European countries came into the EU, it was predominantly Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and then Poland, and latterly Bulgaria and Romania.
Many European people here. There's lots of factory and field work jobs around. Many cabbages. That's where you got sprouts for Christmas. So we are not that bad.
33-year-old Marina Urte moved to Boston in 2007 to start a new life for herself.
Marina came from Latvia. She found work at a fruit packaging plant, and I think she was fairly popular there and well liked.
She was more crazier than me. No, she was a lovely girl. She was beautiful, quite popular. When she started her work, she'd been offered higher position than other people. She was like a leader.
She was known as being quite frank and quite honest, but also a hard worker.
She wanted jobs done right. She would tell you where to go, what to do and how to do. And if obviously somebody was doing something wrong, she wouldn't be quiet. Quite perfectionist.
We were working together in the same factories and we would go out partying sometimes, but I would say most of our time we would spend at the job. Me and Marina, we were similar in terms of career progression and temperament and wanting to improve, earn more money and create more comfortable life for us.
Marina had settled into Boston, and with a steady job and a new group of friends, she met 33-year-old Gytis Griskavikas.
She met Gytis in 2009. He came from Lithuania.
He used to work with us at the factory as well. He was a very nice, intelligent guy, very friendly, very caring. And I just remember that he turned up at our door, taking her out somewhere. They were really happy, they were really in love.
And they married quite quickly, I think, in 2010.
They have a nice wedding, and she have a nice dress, and it was like a fairy tale, like a big love story. They loved each other, and that was really in love and happy.
He was flying and he had all the sparks in his eyes, and Marina, so yeah, they were in love.
And it wasn't long before Marina and Gitas decided to start a family together. In November 2010, Marina gave birth to their baby daughter.
She was very good mommy. She adored the little girl. She was always calling her little princess. Always.
Gitas, likewise, was also a good husband and a good dad. They were a normal, happy family.
Sadly, the relationship between Marina and Gitas didn't last. But they both agreed to raise their daughter together whilst living separately. And as Marina continued to impress at her job, she began to think big for her future.
She was always taking care of flowers, and she always dreamed to have some little shop with many different kinds, and she would sell them for special occasions like weddings or big birthdays.
But in the summer of 2016, everything changes when one of Marina's neighbours calls an emergency engineer, believing there's been a gas leak.
The next door neighbour smelt something under the stairs.
But when the engineer arrives, he suspects the smell is coming from Marina's flat and looks through her letterbox. They spot a smouldering fire and call the fire brigade immediately.
Fire rescue.
Oh, hello. I've been called to the downstairs flat, but we can smell smoke from upstairs, and there's fire damage to the stairs.
Right, okay.
I remember learning there'd been a fire in the Elizabeth Road area of Boston. I don't think there was any obvious sign of a fire from outside, but certainly the neighbours were aware that it had been a fire.
The lady from downstairs thinks there'll be somebody inside upstairs, but we can't get up the stairs because they're too damaged.
Okay, we have got fire crews on the way to it, okay.
Firefighters force their way into the flat and put out the smouldering fire, whilst checking if anyone is home. At first it appears empty, but as the crew enter the bathroom, they make a shocking discovery.
They find a woman, early 30s, in a flat on her own, dead, obviously by strange circumstances, in a bath, no water in the bath, covered in soot, with a hose on top of her. You know, you think, good gracious, how on earth has this happened?
Police are immediately called to the scene.
I want to know what the cause of death is roughly at that stage. So is it a homicide? Is it suspicious? I mean, just because a body's been found in the bath doesn't necessarily mean it's suspicious. It could have been an accidental fire or something like that.
Police quickly establish that the dead woman is Marina Erte. It becomes obvious she has been brutally attacked, with horrific injuries to her face and body. A murder investigation is immediately launched and officers secure the scene.
It's all about scene preservation. The scene can tell you a phenomenal amount, and the last thing that you need is that scene corrupting.
News of Marina's death quickly spreads through the street.
We all gets moved out of the flat, and then the next hour or so, turns out she's been murdered in a bathtub. We never ever thought for a second that there was a murder. We just generally thought there was a fire. Not something you expect to happen on your doorstep. It's just crazy.
In the quaint market town of Boston, Lincolnshire, the usual tranquility has been disturbed by the sirens of fire engines, and neighbours on Elizabeth Road are stunned to learn that not only was the fire set deliberately, but that 33-year-old Marina Erte has been brutally murdered.
The residents were shocked to learn that it was a murder, because initially, like everyone else, they thought it was a fire.
Everybody was in shock. You just didn't know how to get your head around it.
There was always a police car parked just there on the side.
Constant flashes, weren't there?
Yeah.
Forensic cameras, it was just unreal, wasn't it?
It's just not what we expected at all.
It is a quiet area, so for something like this just happened, I think it did shake everybody up, to be honest.
When a crime like that hits Boston, it's very painful to hear. Some Bostonian people, they do feel afraid, they feel afraid going out. It just brings this grey shadow over your community.
As Marina has been senselessly attacked in her home for no apparent reason, the community is on high alert.
The people of Boston feared that there was a killer at large.
It was scary. There was always that worry of somebody coming back. They could have potentially took more lives.
It isn't long before Marina's family and friends learn of the brutal attack on their loved one.
Someone texted me saying that the fire brigade and police is there, so she's been killed.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe. It was my birthday. So obviously, from very high happiness, I went in deep sadness and proper shock. I thought, what? Is that really possible?
With a murder investigation underway, police need to establish a timeline of Marina's last known movements.
There's all sorts of inquiries that need to be made. We would have people immediately looking for CCTV in the area. We'd have people very, very quickly knocking on doors to find out who's been seen in the area, who hasn't. We need to find out when this happened, because that's the starting point, isn't it? When was she last seen, and who was she last seen by? Also, where she worked, who she would normally work with, when should she have been in at work last?
Officers speak to Marina's colleagues at the fruit packing factory where she worked and narrow the time frame on her last known movements.
Police discovered Marina hadn't turned in for work 5 o'clock that morning. So clearly, whatever had happened before that time. And that's absolutely key part of the investigation.
Back at the scene, police and fire experts examine the cause of the fire and quickly establish it had been purposely set after Marina had died.
The early forensic evidence showed that a fire had been set in the flat, but it didn't take properly, so the house wasn't badly damaged by fire.
The fire didn't really take, I think it was just slow burning. But if they'd done a good job on the fire, it could have just took this whole block. That was scary.
With the fire having been set after the attack, detectives speculate whether Marina's killer had tried to destroy evidence at the scene.
They won't have known if they left any forensic evidence there. They won't have known if they left any fingerprints there. They won't have known for sure that someone didn't see them either going or coming back.
Forensic experts are called in. They need to examine the scene to find any clues that might point to Marina's attacker.
When we got there, it was obvious that I wasn't able to do my job. The reason I couldn't do it is because the fire that was started on the stairs had produced a certain excessive amount of soot throughout the flat. And the whole flat was covered in a thin layer of soot, which meant you couldn't see the blood. So at that point, after a brief look around, and we did locate some bloodstains, but it was obvious that the extent of that was much more than what we could see, we decided to go home and have a team of people come in and de-soot the scene, and then us to go back after that process has been done.
Forensics must wait until the thick layer of soot is meticulously cleared before they can work. But detectives do manage to question Marina's ex-husband, Gitas, He says he hasn't seen her, but reveals some information which leads investigators to look deeper into Marina's personal life. And they uncover some disturbing connections to some violent people.
Following the ending of her relationship with Gitas in 2015, she'd formed a new relationship. And it was quickly discovered that she had been involved in a very recent trial at Lincoln Crown Court. She had been charged with perverting the course of justice after her new partner was involved in a violent attack on another group of East Europeans.
The man in question is 42-year-old Alexandra Kudryasov.
Alexander, he worked at the same factory as well. Alexander was involved in what's it called, criminal activity and deviant behaviours and everything. He's got quite a rough background.
Police found out that her new boyfriend had recently been sent to prison for 18 years for grievous bodily harm, dreadful attacking involving knives, and Marina herself had been acquitted for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice in providing him with an alibi, only a matter of days before her body was found. Clearly, it was an obvious line of inquiry that her death might be something to do with those circumstances.
Police want to know, was Marina's involvement in a gang dispute anything to do with her death? Could this have been a revenge attack?
One theory that the police would have been exploring is that maybe one members of the group that were the victims would exact revenge on Marina's partner, and the fact that he'd been convicted and was now out of the way meant that, of course, there was no one to protect Marina at the time.
Police explore the possibility Marina had become mixed up with a bad crowd through her relationship with Alexander. The theory of a revenge attack takes hold, and the safety of Marina's friends and family becomes a police priority.
The fact that a group of East European men have been very, very badly injured by another group of East European men, obviously down in Boston there would have been tensions between the various people involved, the various families.
Clearly, one of the concerns for the police initially was the welfare of the child, and any other family members as well.
As police make sure Marina's loved ones are kept safe, post-mortem results arrive which offer clues to her attacker.
Marina had suffered traumatic brain injury, and she had fractured eye sockets and other injuries.
We know that it wasn't a knife used. It could have been done with fists, kicking, or a blunt instrument.
It was clearly a very violent and cold-blooded killing.
And with the scene now cleared of soot from the fire, forensic results arrive, which further paints a horrific picture.
What we found was a large pool of blood in the living room with smears around it, and there were small spots of blood radiating from it, indicating that there's been impacts in that area, probably into Marina herself. I suspect that she's gone into the living room for whatever reason, been hit, gone down almost straight away, and then been assaulted on the floor by punching or kicking or with a blunt instrument.
Forensic results also show bloody track marks from the living room to the bathroom.
The two track marks is where her heels were in contact with the ground as she's been dragged across the landing and into the bathroom. In the bathroom, there were spatters of blood around the bath and on the floor to indicate that she'd been further assaulted in that area. Her body was found naked in the bath. There was no blood-stained clothing, so when it happened, she was most likely naked. And the pathologist said that Maria had actually been drowned by having the shower head forced into her mouth, and it was that which actually killed her in the end, was the cause of death.
But who could have carried out such an horrific attack? Had Marina become sucked into a gangland dispute, and paid the ultimate price for it.
We'd heard that she had gone to court to do with this gang-related thing.
Yeah.
We thought she'd just got her. They'd found out where she lived and got her.
In the Lincolnshire town of Boston, police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old Marina Urte, who was found in her own home beaten and drowned in the bath. Her boyfriend, Alexandra Kudryasov, is in prison, serving an 18-year sentence for a vicious attack during a gangland dispute. Whilst he is ruled out as a suspect, there are suspicions that Marina has been murdered in a gangland revenge attack.
After it happened, we used to see this really spruced up black car coming past. We kept thinking, oh, is this to do with, like, this gang-related thing? That's pretty much everybody's first thoughts, wasn't it?
But police are keeping an open mind.
It's the age-old adage, ABC of investigating. Accept nothing, believe no one, and check absolutely everything. If it was anything to do with the grievous bodily harm trial and Marina being acquitted of conspiracy and almost a revenge attack by perhaps those people that had been the victims in the first place, one would expect it to be almost tit for tat. Revenge is usually about, I'm going to give you what you gave to me. That's what revenge is. Revenge doesn't normally extend to attacking a defenseless woman in her own home, viciously and violently over a prolonged period of time. That, to me, was not a revenge attack.
Police also suspect that the lack of a forced entry points to a different explanation.
That immediately means to me, this is personal. That would be my first thought there. This is not a random attack. This isn't a burglary gone wrong or anything like that. This is personal, for some reason or other. Whoever did this to Marina knew her, and Marina knew them and had let them in the house.
With this latest theory, police look closely at Marina's inner circle.
One of the key elements is always to find out who saw the victim alive last.
Police would have been looking to question those who were closely connected to Marina. That would have been her former partner and her former husband, also her sister who lived nearby. As every police officer knows, most murders are committed by people known to the victim, so it would have been their primary avenue of inquiry.
As Marina and her ex-husband Gitis had shared custody of their daughter, police question him about the last time he saw her.
Under questioning, Gitis did disclose his movements on the night and day before the murder. He disclosed that he'd been celebrating his birthday.
He immediately said, yeah, Marina had come to his house, had then gone to a supermarket and bought some whiskey, and then gone back to her flat.
This would have been late in the evening into the early hours of the next day. And he said that he left Marina's flat at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that when he left she was fine.
They'd had a pleasant evening, they'd had a few drinks, but there was nothing else. He was saying, it's not me.
With Gitis admitting to being with Marina on the night of the murder, but claiming to have left on good terms at 2 a.m, investigators have little else to link him to the murder.
But he'd said that he'd been at the flat the night before. That poses actually an interesting dilemma for a senior investigating officer. Is what do you do with that? It's only suspicion. There is no hard evidence. You are hoping you're going to find some hard evidence through maybe forensic examination of the scene, CCTV or anything like that. But that takes a long time.
Even without evidence against Gitis, police need to act fast in case he is in any way connected to the crime.
As the senior investigating officer, it's your decision whether to arrest a suspect and not only whether to arrest a suspect at that time, when you do it and under what circumstances. The senior investigating officer in this case took the view that it was the most advantageous way for the investigation was to make an early arrest.
Gytis Griskevicius is arrested on suspicion of the murder of his ex-wife Marina.
It won't have been an easy decision. There would have been a train of thought undoubtedly about, well, there's no evidence here that he's involved. There will have been opinions within senior officers, probably more senior than the SIO in this case, that he shouldn't have been arrested. We would know that we'd only be able to keep him in custody a maximum of 24 hours, and if no evidence came forward during that period of time, he'd have to be released. So it's not a straightforward decision.
With the time ticking against them, police further questioned Gytis under caution.
He gave the same story as he'd done before he'd been arrested, that he'd been there with Marina voluntarily, he'd left around 2 o'clock in the morning. She was fine when he left her.
But with Gytis now in custody, police can delve deeper into his life to find any evidence that might connect him to Marina's murder.
Once we arrest him, the purpose of that is to enable the police to search the house, search his vehicle, search him, examine him for any injuries.
On closer examination, officers notice an injury on Gytis' right hand, which he explains was caused by an accident. Despite the suspicious injury and Gytis being the last known person to see Marina alive, the police have no further evidence. And Gytis has been in custody for almost 24 hours.
One has to make a decision. Have we got enough evidence here to charge him? Clearly they hadn't.
Gytis is released on bail.
The news obviously left question marks for people in the area. Was this the man? Had they caught the killer? Or was the perpetrator still at large?
Police now move their focus away from Gytis and cast the net wider. They trawl through hours of CCTV across the local area in hopes to find anything that might lead them to Marina's killer.
They would have trawled hundreds of hours of CCTV.
CCTV examination is an art form. It isn't just a straightforward process. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks to do it methodically. Some of the bigger police forces these days have dedicated teams whose sole job it is to do that.
And after hours of examination, police find footage from the early hours of the 20th of May, the day Marina was thought to have been murdered. And it places Gytis back in the frame.
They managed to find him on CCTV.
The footage shows Gytis running towards Marina's house at 9:30 p.m. Rather than he had claimed, heading there with Marina after a party at his. Then, 2 hours later at 11:30 p.m, Marina and Gytis are seen together at a nearby supermarket. And then, crucially, he is caught on camera returning to his house much later than 2 a.m, the time he told police.
So he had not left Marina's home at 2 o'clock in the morning and gone straight home. He was seen around 7:30 in the morning, and I believe he got back to his own premises around about 8 o'clock in the morning. So straight away they know he wasn't where he said he was, when he said he was there. The story he gave from the outset was a pack of lies.
The CCTV footage disproves Gytis' story and places him near to the scene on the morning of the murder. But the police still need more evidence to strengthen their case.
The police would then start thinking, well, how can we bolster this circumstantial evidence?
The police then begin to find other pieces of evidence that link him to the murder. A pair of his shorts were found in his washing machine, which he was seen to be wearing on CCTV.
And lo and behold, no blood was found on the shorts or anything like that. But the police would then say, well, where's the hoodie that he was wearing? Where's the T-shirt that he was wearing? Where's his footwear? Where are his socks? none of which was ever found. The fact that he couldn't account for that, again, just adds to the circumstantial evidence.
Gitis's phone is seized and searched, which raises further suspicion.
They found he had inadvertently wiped all the data off his phone.
The police believe Gitis deliberately wiped his phone to hide incriminating messages. But with the only evidence being circumstantial, and forensic results from the scene showing no strong link to Gitis being the killer, will it be enough to charge him for murder? Or will the theory of a gang-related revenge attack for the crimes of her boyfriend hold the truth to the killing? Lincolnshire police are investigating the murder of 33-year-old mum Marina Urte. And although they have circumstantial evidence that links her ex-husband Gitis Griskevicius to the crime, they are lacking forensic evidence. Meanwhile, her new boyfriend is serving 18 years in prison for a violent assault on a rival gang, and there's a theory Marina could have been killed in a revenge attack. Then the police make an announcement. The Crown Prosecution Service has decided to send the case to trial. And it's Gitis they believe is the killer.
Following the CCTV and other pieces of evidence, Gitis was rearrested and charged with the murder.
Gitis pleads not guilty. And with the evidence being mainly circumstantial, the police have their work cut out to prove there is enough to convict him.
Certainly the lead up to a trial for murder involves a phenomenal amount of work. Making sure the evidence is presented in the correct fashion, making sure witnesses turn up. My feeling at the beginning of every murder trial I've been involved in was a fear of being perceived to have let the victim and the victim's family down. They are completely beholding upon you as an individual to bring some justice for their loved one.
In March 2017, the trial into Marina's murder begins at Lincoln Crown Court. And as Marina's friends and family enter the courtroom, they come face to face with her alleged killer.
When I came in, he looked at me with the eyes full of almost tears, and he looked at me as if I didn't do it.
As the trial begins, Marina's close friends reveal to the court details of her relationship with Gitis.
I remember she came to me when she was already heavily pregnant, and she was complaining that she's put on so much weight and Gitis is not happy anymore because she's not in the same shape as before. So I did notice that something was off. Why would you judge your wife for being a bit overweight when she's carrying your child?
And as time went by, the relationship continued to break down.
Then Gitis stopped investing into the family, doing anything around the house. And she would work and she would take all overtimes. So sometimes she would go weeks without a day off. And she would mention to him, maybe you should work more, or maybe you should at least wash the dishes. Then he would turn it back on her and humiliate her in terms of the weight or how she looks.
Marina then began to consider a life away from her husband.
She said to me that she wants a real man who'd take care of her and she would feel loved and cared for.
And in 2015, Marina broke off the relationship. And it wasn't long before she met her new partner, Alexander.
Marina was very happy. She said that I finally feel like a woman and I finally feel like I've been cared for. He gave me a perfume and she said that over all these years with Gitis, he never gave her anything like that. She felt so much appreciated.
And friends revealed to the court that Gitas did not take Marina's new relationship well.
Piskevicius was still besotted with Marina. They'd split acrimoniously, but he still harboured a desire to get back with her. And he hated the fact that she was now with someone else.
He was described as being very jealous about the new boyfriend.
I met with him a few times on the street, and he said, how could she leave him? Because he's so good in bed. So he was not even thinking about the quality of life. He was raging about if his size is larger than his, how could she swap me for someone else?
But when Marina was arrested for perverting the course of justice, Gitas decides to use their daughter as leverage to get her back.
When police come up and arrested her, she didn't have a passport, she lost the job, and she didn't have a place to live. She lost everything, and in that moment, he got the girl.
She was praying and hoping that everything's gonna work out so she could then finally reunite with her daughter.
When she was fully acquitted of any wrongdoing, Marina asked to be reunited with her daughter. But Gitas refused.
I told him that you probably ought to allow Marina see the child, at least under the supervision of social workers in the children's center once a week for a few hours. She's probably missing her mother, and he was absolutely reluctant to do that, and he mentioned that we don't even mention mother's name in the house. Her girl was not allowed to pronounce her name in front of him.
He was sending her nasty messages about the girl, like no money, no honey, asking for money. Then he was taking girl out from the country, which she supposed not to do, and then posting in a Facebook saying, oh, hello, we are here. That was very nasty.
And things only got worse for Marina.
Marina had made all sorts of complaints against Piskevicius. She couldn't prove any of them. I think her vehicle had been damaged, she'd had a pedal bike stolen. She didn't know that it was him for sure, but she thought it really was, and it frightened her. There were a couple of occasions when she went to the police because he was seen filming her on his mobile phone, arriving at her house unannounced, and it spooked her to such an extent she went to the police.
I think Marina had confided in certain friends that she was worried that Gitas was stalking her.
She rings me one day, she says, he was standing on the corner of the street looking at the house.
However, in the last few days of Marina's life, hers and Gitas' relationship seemed to rekindle.
They restarted the communication. She rang me and she was so happy to say, oh, you don't know what just happened. I will see the child soon and he's talking to me in a nice way. And she was willing to resolve the conflict for her, for the daughter, and for him, for Gitas even. Just before the day, she rang me and she was very excited. And he said that he loves me and he wants to get back. He's the father of my child. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And he wants to come over. He wants to celebrate his birthday with me. And I did tell her, do not meet him on your own.
Piskevicius was still besotted with Marina. I think he saw an opportunity there to say, right, I'm the father of your child. This is my birthday. Let's celebrate together. Give it another go and rekindle our marriage.
Back in the courtroom, it appears with only circumstantial evidence, Gitas could still walk free. But then a new witness takes to the stand and flips the case on its head.
This individual contacted the police and said this guy admitted to me what he'd done. He admitted to me that he'd murdered Marina, and then he admitted that he'd set fire to the premises. And I'm prepared to give evidence to that effect.
After a grueling 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Gitas Griskevicius is found guilty of Marina Urte's murder. He is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years in prison.
The guy came and gave his evidence, and obviously the jury took it on board, and ultimately, with that and with all the circumstantial evidence, unanimously convicted him of murder. He's got to spend 23 years in jail before he even becomes eligible for parole. That's a long time by anyone's book. But you know, he committed one of the most horrific crimes you could imagine. On a defenceless mother of his own child, my view is that he deserves every one of those 23 years.
But why did Gitas decide to kill Marina? On that fateful night on the 20th of May 2016.
I think it was about the fact that she was shunning his advances. Even though her new boyfriend was going to be in prison for 18 years, she still wanted to stick by him. He couldn't bear the thought of that. And I think he thought, well, if I can't have you, no one else can.
I think Gitas was jealous and had been humiliated by the new relationship, and that was his motive for the murder.
He'd taken the poor woman, battered and beaten, from one part of the flat to another, where he attacked her again, bundled her into a bath, and then drowned her with a hose. I mean, how callous and calculating can you get?
And for Marina's neighbours, her killing still haunts them to this day.
I always get the question, did you not hear anything? I'm like, no, I didn't. I'm like, so wish I did. It was in my mind for a very long time, thinking, why the hell could I not just hear anything? And then maybe we could have given her some hope. No matter how much danger I'd be in, I would have busted through the door and tried to help. 100%. If I'd have heard anything, I'd have gone straight in there and tried to help her. Even though I'd be putting myself at danger, I'd still help her, because nobody deserves to lose life like that.
And for Marina's friends and family, with the case behind them, they are slowly coming to terms with a life without her.
The biggest thing I miss about Marina is her liveliness. She was very, very positive girl, full with ideas, full with life.
I miss everything about her because I don't have anyone similar to her. She was a very good friend, and in my difficult situations, when I'm so upset and I'm so down, I know that she would be the person to turn to. She would just tell me, everything's going to be all right. Don't worry about anything. Everything's going to be perfect. And she had so much power in these words that I would straight away feel better. Yeah.
Hampshire Fire and Rescue received a call.
The house was really ablaze.
Fire officers, when they went upstairs, they found a naked female. There was blood on the walls. She had some cable ties wrapped around her wrists, and she had stab wound injuries to her neck.
I screamed and shouted and cried. I felt like half of me was gone.
I wouldn't have expected something like that to happen in this area. You just really feel for those children that have now got to grow up without a mother.
3 men arrived at her dress, trying to break in, and had threatened to strangle and have sex with her.
We got told by CID that they had somebody that they thought murdered my sister.
On the south coast of Hampshire, on the Fareham Peninsula, lies Gosport. Once the base for the Navy's supply chain, this picturesque town acts as a commuter hub for Portsmouth City across the harbour.
The Gosport, I'd say, is quite a quiet place to live. It's got a lovely coastline, and it's quite good for families. There's quite good connections to schools around the area, and you can quite easily get across to Portsmouth, to Gunwharf. Yeah, I'd say it's quite a nice, relaxed place to live for families and also the elderly.
Gosport really does have its own identity. The only way you can get there is either on ferry from Portsmouth or a couple of roads coming in and out of Gosport. So you very much feel like you're on the peninsula there, kind of isolated.
I think there is quite a different culture. It seems it's quite separate from Portsmouth because of the water.
We've got a really good leisure centre, lots of nice pubs, and there's always a park just literally round the corner. And you can get anywhere on a bicycle as well because we've got fantastic cycle tracks here. We have a lot of people from all over the world really living here, and plus because it's naval, it just really has a lot of people here that are from all walks of life really.
You have areas where the housing is very close in, rammed together, and you have others, bigger, larger houses with the more affluent.
In Gosport, especially with this road, you definitely could knock on any door and ask for help, definitely. And a lot of people have lived here all their lives.
Which is true of 27-year-old Kelly Ann Case, who was born and spent most of her life in Gosport.
When we was growing up, she was very bubbly. She loved to do dancing. She loved sports. She was very fun. We used to like doing like rollerblading when we was younger. We would do like all different activities, even if it was just walking to the beach and just acting like big children. Even though we was probably 15, 16, she would love it. We would argue and bicker, but it would never last very long. We would always make up within about half an hour.
But Kelly had to grow up quickly, after she fell pregnant in her teens.
Kelly was a very young mum, but she never pictured herself having children. But she told everyone it was the best thing she ever did.
But being a single mum didn't stop her from finding the time for love.
She was always lucky in love. Sometimes they didn't work out for many reasons, but she was always careful with who she loved and who she didn't love. She was actually on her own for a while because that's what she wanted. She wanted to be on her own, but in past relationships she has been very lucky in love. She would always make people laugh, and she would always be like the highlight of the day, no matter how down you was or how low you was. She would always make you laugh.
Police, where's your emergency?
I woke up and I opened the window, got the kids up like you normally do, and then could smell a really strong smell of burning. It wasn't a normal smell of burning. I could see smoke coming out from the house.
The residents of a quiet street in the north of Gosport awoken to a house fire.
Hampshire Fire and Rescue received a call from a couple of builders that were in the area that saw smoke billowing from the address in Grange Crescent.
The house was really starting to go ablaze.
The builders were working in the area and they noticed some black smoke billowing from the address of Kelly's. And concerned that somebody may still be in there, they started banging on the windows trying to raise the alarm. There was no response, and Hampshire Fire and Rescue arrived at the scene fairly quickly.
There was probably 4 or 5 firemen in the back garden, which is very, very tiny. The glass was starting to smash. They were in and out of the house, obviously with the hoses going and trying to put the fire out.
Kelly's house is ablaze, and as neighbours watch, all thoughts turn to her children.
Because I'd seen the children going in and out, every so often, and I was thinking, oh no, I hope they're not there. I hope nobody's there. That's what my worry was. I wanted to know if the kids were there because it was just a bit heartbreaking, really.
Fire crews break through the front door.
They found 2 areas that were alight in the ground floor of the address and then searched the rest of the premises.
The fire crews search the front bedrooms and find no one. But then they make their way into the back bedroom.
And it was inside there that the firefighters found the very shocking and grisly discovery of Kellyanne Case's body in her bedroom.
Firefighters are suddenly confronted with a horrific scene. Kelly has been the victim of a brutal and sadistic attack.
Fire officers are used to going into dangerous situations and dealing with traumatic incidents, but when they went upstairs, they weren't expecting to find what they saw, which was a naked female tied up with multiple stab wounds and an obviously slashed neck. I mean, it was pretty traumatic.
What immediately happened then was the firefighters alerted the police whilst they tackled the fire that was still in the house.
And over the next 2-3 hours, more fire engines and police cars. The road was pretty much full. And everyone was talking about it on Facebook and on what's happening down there.
News spreads across the community and reaches Kelly's family.
I immediately rushed to Kelly's house and then spoke to the police officer and asked whether it was my sister's house. And they confirmed that it was. 2 CID officers come up to me and my mum. They both turned around and said that there is a body and it is deceased. I kind of screamed and shouted and cried.
Police believe there's no time to lose if they want to catch whoever was responsible for Kellyanne's killing.
Because of the way Kelly was found and the significant injuries that were so obvious, it was called as a murder investigation very, very quickly. And so we take control of the scene immediately. We try to identify who the victim is.
Detectives realised that the fire was set deliberately, potentially to destroy evidence.
We noticed there were 2 seats of fire initially. One was in the kitchen and one was in the living room. And it looked like bedding had been piled up and deliberately set alight. Upstairs in the back bedroom, Kelly was lying on the bed, naked. The bed was completely stripped. She had some cable ties wrapped around her wrists, and she had some obvious stab wound injuries to her neck. Her face looked like it had taken some kind of physical assault as well, and there was blood on the walls and on the floors.
Police believe that the motive for the murder could have been sexual in nature.
I think when you find a female naked in bed like that, tied up with cable ties, the assumption one has to make is that this is possibly a sexual assault. The pathology is then carried out. Can we then confirm that?
The situation of Kelly's body and the manner in which she was attacked leads investigators to consider a terrifying possibility.
There's certainly a number of lines of inquiry and hypothesis that a senior investigating officer would form at the beginning of any homicide investigation, and one of those would be that this is a stranger attack. This is somebody who is not known to Kelly.
In the coastal town of Gosport, police are investigating the murder of 27-year-old mum of 3, Kellyanne Case. Her body has been found after her house was deliberately set ablaze.
Kelly was stripped, she was tied up, and she was tortured and then brutally stabbed with a knife.
Detectives believe that the sadistic and sexual nature of the murder suggests it could have been a stranger who killed her. And so they have to consider a terrifying prospect.
When we commenced our investigation, we'd contacted the National Crime Agency to see if there were any outstanding similar offences anywhere in the UK that we could liaise with those local police forces and share information with.
With the police having to consider this could be the work of a serial killer, at the scene a major incident is declared, and the street has been secured.
We had tape going from the end of the road all the way across, down that end, and then they cordoned off all the way down the bottom. all the alleyways at the back. Yeah, it was just literally everywhere. Tape everywhere. Even
all the little alleyways that go in between the houses had.
Yeah, because you've got a little alleyway there, and they were just cordoned off, didn't they? Yeah.
The news that a young woman has been brutally murdered stuns the close-knit community.
When we found out it was a murder, that was horrific. That sends alarm bells, you know, because you don't know who it is.
Covering Gosport, there's lots of low-level crime that goes on. There are lots of break-ins to houses and sheds and outbuildings. The deaths and murders are very few and far between and send shockwaves through the community when they happen.
It's just really sad that I wouldn't have expected something like that to happen in this area. And especially for a young woman who's kind of around our age, it definitely makes me feel quite uncomfortable. And you just really feel for those children, 3 children that have now got to grow up without a mother.
Whenever any murder happens, it has a huge impact on the community, particularly if the suspect is outstanding. So people are worried, who is it? Why have they done it? And will they strike again? So our job as the police is to try and reassure the community that, you know, we are working hard to try and catch the killer and that we will do that as quickly as possible.
Suspecting that this could be a stranger attack, officers start house-to-house inquiries, and a neighbour steps forward.
During our inquiries, we came across a witness who did identify a male that he saw at about 5 to 7 on the morning of the 30th of July, who was just in the area of Grange Crescent.
A neighbour had reported seeing a sort of a scruffy, unshaven person near Kellyanne Case's home.
Described as looking a bit odd, surveying the premises, wearing a cap. And he said he's sort of driven up and down that road about that time for the last 10 years and never noticed anyone before. So this person definitely stood out for him and seemed suspicious.
Who was this man? And did he have anything to do with Kelly's death? But before detectives progress further, a check on Kelly's property uncovers a worrying development, which places their theory of a random stranger attack in doubt.
What was strange is that there was no sign of forced entry. The back door was unlocked, which would either suggest it's someone incredibly lucky trying doors, or somebody knew that Kelly was there and that the back door was unlocked.
Had Kelly known her killer? Or was it just pure chance that her door was unlocked so early on a weekday morning? The investigation shifts and focuses on Kelly's life circumstances.
In any homicide investigation, we would carry out a victimology, which is looking at the detail of the life of the victim, which includes, you know, previous partners, potentially people having an affair, issues at work that we might uncover. So it's quite common for us to go through the victim's history with a fine-tooth comb.
As detectives question friends and family, they uncover that Kelly was going through a difficult period in her life.
Kelly struggled with a lot of different things in life. She was always open and honest with people, but when she did struggle, sometimes Kelly did drink.
She'd fallen on some difficult times. She'd recently had her children taken off of her by social services on a temporary basis. She had issues with alcohol and drugs, and I would describe her as vulnerable.
The investigation also uncovers elements about Kelly's lifestyle.
I mean, Kelly was well known. She had a wide circle of friends. Her neighbours weren't big fans of hers, if I'm honest. She would have regular visitors to the address, 3 or 4 parties a week.
She used to have parties with music and stuff.
I had seen quite a few people going in and out of the house, obviously just thinking they were just friends.
Often police would be called to excess noise issues, antisocial behaviour issues, and she would probably hang around with the wrong people, I would suggest.
As officers investigate further, evidence shows that Kelly had been threatened just a few months previously.
Back in March 2019, Kelly had had some kind of party at her address, and there was an altercation there where the male ended up with a fractured jaw. And as a result of that, Kelly received some threats by family members of that man, and she had to flee the address for her own safety. So she left the area for some time and returned to Gosport a couple of months later.
I think she left for about 3-4 months, but she couldn't be without her family, so she decided to come back.
But with the threat still hanging over her, Kellyanne's neighbours noticed a change in her demeanour.
She kept herself to herself. She used to hang around out her front door having cigarettes, and you'd walk past her and she wasn't very chatty. But we didn't see a lot of her, to be honest.
No.
Heard a lot of her, but didn't see a lot of her.
Police believe Kellyanne was vulnerable and involved with some unsavoury characters. And after interviewing friends, key information points to a potential lead.
She had had this row the night before with one of her friends, so that was key that we identify who they were. We wanted to establish what the row was about and who was involved. So lines of inquiry were set in relation to identifying those individuals. But we also found out through her phone that she'd been receiving threats from 3 men who had arrived at her address, were trying to break in and had threatened to strangle and have sex with her. This was told to one of her friends. And obviously through house to house, we'd established that people had been at that address during the evening at various times. So again, it was really keen to try and identify those individuals quickly, because they may have some vital information, or they may be the killer and they may have vital forensic evidence on them still.
Could any of these people have something to do with Kelly's death? But before detectives can follow the leads, they get an unexpected call. A 32-year-old man called Will Valander comes forward.
My sister was actually seeing Will Valander at the time.
We believe that one of Kelly's family contacted Will Valander and they notified him of the death. It then quickly dawned on him that he was possibly one of the last people to see Kelly alive, having left her address at about 6:30 that morning. As soon as Valander made contact with the police, the decision was taken to arrest him on suspicion of Kelly's murder and seize his phone and his clothing so that we could then forensically examine those. One might question, well, if he's rang the police, why would you arrest him? Surely he's got nothing to hide. But if you flip it the other way and think, well, actually, he's got things to hide and he's now trying to give a reasonable excuse as to why his DNA may be at Kelly's address or on Kelly, and he's getting his story in first before the police catch up with him.
But Valander's connection to Kelly and his ultimate link to her murder is about to point the investigation in a completely new direction.
He was obviously jealous, and he decided it was his turn to go and see Kelly and have sex with her.
In Gosport, police are investigating the murder of mum of 3, Kellyanne Case, who was found stripped, bound and stabbed after her house was set on fire. The day before she died, Kellyanne told her friends that 3 men had turned up at her house, threatening to break in and rape her. Police also have a report of a suspicious man loitering outside her house in the early hours of the morning. But all attention has fallen on Will Valander, who has been arrested on suspicion of Kellyanne's murder.
When I found out Kellyanne was murdered, I felt like half of me was gone. Some CID officers come to my mum's house and told my mum everything that happened and that it was murder. And then my mum sat and read a piece of paper to me and my siblings of what actually happened. We got told by CID that they had somebody that they thought murdered my sister. We didn't actually know who it was at the beginning.
Police have arrested Kellyanne's friend, Will Valander, who came forward saying he had spent the night with her before she died.
When Will Valander was in custody, he was interviewed by detectives, and actually he gave a very detailed account of what his movements were the night before Kelly's death. And he explained that he'd been drinking most of the day. I think around midnight time he received a phone call from Kelly. She was quite upset. She said she'd had some people round earlier in the evening. She'd fallen out with one of them, and could he come round?
He was out in Gosport and he was with his friend Brendan Rowan Davies.
So Brendan was a friend of Will Valander. They would meet every now and then, and on that night Kelly called. Will had been out all day drinking with Brendan, and Brendan decided to tag along So they stopped off, bought some vodka, and then went off to Kelly's, where they consumed the vodka and also had some cocaine.
After drinking and taking cocaine, Vallender says he and Kellyanne went to bed, leaving his friend downstairs.
What Will Vallender then said was that him and Brendan Rowan Davis then left the home of Kelly at around about 6:30 in the morning.
Both Will Vallender and Brendan Rowan Davies left her home alone. They caught a taxi back to Vallender's house, and then Rowan Davies said he was going to go back to his home as well.
With Vallender claiming that Kellyanne was alive when he and Brendan left, police need to build up a full picture of what really happened that night. Key to this is interviewing his friend.
Officers were tasked to go and locate Brendan Rowan Davis, again somebody who would have been the last person to have seen Kelly before she was found murdered. They went to his home address and there was no response.
With no sign of Brendan, Vallender tells the police that he'd spoken to his friend earlier that day.
Vallender had contacted Brendan Rowan Davis to tell him to contact the police as well. And the fact that Brendan Rowan Davis didn't makes that extremely suspicious in my view.
What had happened to Brendan? Was he afraid to speak to the police? While the investigation unfolds, the community is coming together to pay their respects.
People kept coming down the road, laying flowers, laying teddy bears, candles. Her sister was there quite a lot, and it was just really sad. I felt for the children more than anything.
When Kellyanne Case's death was formally announced by the police and she was identified, there was an outpouring of grief for this young mum, and that sort of materialised with a fundraising campaign to raise money, which ultimately raised about £1,300 for her funeral.
As the community mourns, the investigation is centring around the last two people who saw Kellyanne alive. And police have made a second arrest.
So within 24 hours, the police located Brendan Rowan Davis. He was with his brother over in Portsmouth. Police were dispatched and he was arrested on suspicion of Kelly's murder.
Rowan Davies' response to the police when they mentioned the murder or death of this woman was, I had an idea about that. Apart from that, he said very little. He was taken into custody. He was questioned and he just replied no comment to the questions that were asked.
With Brendan refusing to answer any questions, detectives turned to CCTV analysis to verify Vallender's account.
Because Vallender gave a detailed account of his movements with Brendan Rowan Davis on the way to Kelly's address and also leaving there. So we were able to establish, following the route that Vallender said he took with Brendan Rowan Davis, various CCTV points to identify the two of them together.
The footage shows Vallender and Rowan Davies taking a taxi from the end of Kellyanne's Road at 6:30 a.m. The taxi drops them off at Vallender's address 10 minutes later, where they're seen crossing the car park. 20 minutes later, Rowan Davies is seen heading towards his flat, arriving back at just before 7 a.m. Vallender's account of his movements seems to be true. But then, police analyse what Brendan did next.
Brendan Rowan Davis made his way back to his home address. We had cameras in that area that then picked him up about half an hour later, leaving his home address, but this time in a change of clothing, which is suspicious in itself.
Brendan is captured on the bus CCTV. But where is he going?
So having picked up the suspect on the bus, we know he got off just outside Cambridge Road, and so we're able to then scope the area for CCTV. Unfortunately, we came across CCTV in the kebab shop just behind me on the corner of Cambridge Road and Brockenhurst Road.
Brendan is seen walking back towards Kellyanne's house, just over an hour after leaving it.
The CCTV places him at the house for about 40 minutes.
Well, we believe that when Rowan Davis led himself into the address, he crept upstairs and Kelly was likely to be asleep. You know, it was the early hours of the morning. She'd been up all night partying. And he let himself in, and I think at that point he then held a knife point and then tied her up and brutally beat her. And then some 40 minutes later, he's then picked up again on CCTV, heading back towards his home address.
But he doesn't head straight home. Instead, he walks to his mother's house, a short distance from where Kellyanne lives.
So we know that around 9 o'clock in the morning, Rowan Davies returned to his mum's address, where he then changed his clothes and then left that premises with a bag, and he was seen heading along this footpath. 2 hours later, a witness came forward who found some burning remains of clothes, which we then recovered.
Further CCTV evidence shows Brendan retracing his steps home.
We then find him at his home address on CCTV going to the bin shed area. But this time he's carrying 2 bags, one blue one and one white one, and he disposes of them.
Police immediately search his property and the bins.
What they find is a pair of knickers, which they believe to be Kelly's, and also some training shoes that have some blood on them.
Police also find items which match those found on the victim.
Kelly was bound up on the bed and she was tied up with some cable ties around her wrists. We found some further cable ties at the address that matched the same description of those found around Kelly's wrists.
Having uncovered both the means and the opportunity to commit the murder, the investigation turns to a potential motive and who this prime suspect is.
The connection between Rowan Davies and Kellyanne Case was mainly through Will Vallender. Rowan Davies appeared to be this sort of hanger-on, this kind of tagged-along friend. You know, the two knew each other, or knew of each other, but I don't think they were ever close friends particularly.
He was a big man. He was 6'3", quite a strong man. We understand he had a low IQ, about 50 or 60, and he also had learning disabilities, including dyslexia. He was known to the police. He had about 6 previous convictions, but the most alarming one was a previous conviction for burglary of a house he broke into where the female was still on the premises. So a really concerning MO, I would suggest.
Detectives believe they have their killer, and when forensics return, it confirms their suspicions.
We then get the forensic results on the cable ties that were found around Kelly's wrists. And they have Kelly's DNA on them, obviously, but they also have Rowan Davies's DNA on them. So we went to the Crown Prosecution Service with all the evidence that we'd amassed against Rowan Davies, and they agreed to charge him with the murder of Kellyanne Case.
Will Vallender is released without charge, and a trial date is set for Rowan Davies. But when he gets his day in front of the jury, his account of what happened suddenly puts the case in question.
He said he was grabbed by a masked man who was armed with a knife, who threatened to kill him if he told anyone what he'd seen.
In Gosport, Hampshire, police have charged Brendan Rowan Davies with the brutal murder of mother of 3, Kellyanne Case. CCTV footage shows that after spending the night partying with Kellyanne and her friend, Rowan Davies returned to her house on the morning after. His DNA has been found on zip ties used to restrain her, and the blood found on his trainers is Kellyanne's. But he denies murder. Whilst police believe they have a solid case, they also have concerns as the trial approaches. As not only was an unknown man spotted loitering outside Kellyanne's house on the morning of the murder, but she had recently been threatened.
The fact that we had these issues, these unknowns of potentially people threatening Kelly in the past, death threats to Kelly, people falling out with her, that was the biggest concern, is that we needed to convince the jury that Brendan Rowan Davies was the person responsible.
The trial gets underway at Winchester Crown Court.
The atmosphere in court for the trial at the beginning was tense. Obviously there were family members and friends of Kellyanne Case who were anxious to see justice be done.
I was at the trial the whole 4 weeks in Winchester. I was there with many family members, including my mum, who never ever missed a day. It was very tiring, but it was all worth it. It helped me to try and grieve for her, because I didn't want to grieve for her. I didn't want to believe it. And still to this day, I still feel sometimes that she's going to walk through my door, and she's not.
The pressure is on for Hampshire Constabulary, especially as Rowan Davies, who had remained silent during the investigation, has made some concerning claims to his defence.
Prior to the trial, the defence issue us with what's called a defence case statement. And what Brendan Rowan Davies was saying was that he did go to the address on that night with Will Valander. He did leave with Will, but when he got home at 7 o'clock in the morning, he realised that he'd left his tobacco at the address, and so he went back to Kelly's to retrieve his tobacco. He said he found the back door left open, so when he went into the address, he went upstairs and he saw Kelly on the bed, naked, but she was unconscious, and then he was grabbed by a masked man who was armed with a knife, who threatened to kill him if he told anyone what he'd seen. He said he was so terrified he left the address and didn't tell anyone.
Could Rowan Davies be telling the truth? Was there an unknown masked assailant involved? But on examination, police believe there are major holes in his story.
He was cross-examined by the QC for the prosecution, and things just didn't stack up with his defence. The fact that he'd gone into the address and then suddenly this unknown masked attacker had grabbed him but not harmed him at all, so there was no injury to him, that didn't stack up. He then tried to explain why his DNA was going to be on Kelly and why Kelly's DNA was going to be on him by the fact that he was then pushed onto Kelly. The cable ties that Kelly had around her arms were the same ones found at his home address. He couldn't give an explanation for that. The change of clothes he had with him at the time that he went to Kelly's that he then changed into when he went to his mother's address, he couldn't give an account for that. That didn't make sense.
He claimed to have been absolutely scared and frightened by this mystery man, but CCTV footage from inside the bus that he took when he went home after killing Kellyanne Case showed that he wasn't petrified. He went to his mum's house afterwards and didn't say to her that he was scared at all. He said nothing to anyone until he had to suddenly defend himself in court.
By Rowan Davies' account, he left Kellyanne alive but unconscious with the masked assailant at 8:30 a.m. But just 3 minutes later, builders noticed smoke coming from Kelly's house.
The timings of Rowan Davies' account don't stack up.
In court, there was a lot of disbelief as to what Rowan Davies was actually saying.
Under cross-examination, Rowan Davies is asked how the masked assailant could have tortured Kellyanne, killed her and set fire to the house in the 3 minutes after he left.
His whole case was that within about a 3-minute window, this mystery man had murdered Kellyanne Case, and that Rowan Davies had walked off terrified, too scared to tell anyone about it. Rowan Davies' whole case seemed to be ludicrously implausible, just didn't seem to have been able to happen at all.
I thought Brendan's story was rubbish. This third person would not have allowed him to walk out of the house. You're not going to allow a person that have just witnessed you kill somebody, you're not going to allow them to walk. And in that space of grabbing his backy and then walking out of my sister's back door, not running, walking.
Whilst Rowan Davies' account is under scrutiny, the prosecution know they need to establish a motive for murder.
Brendan Rowan Davies clearly had some sort of sexual interest in her. It emerged at the trial that he said to her that he'd always fancied her.
But she just laughed that off and didn't take it seriously.
Kelly would never have a relationship with him, and Brendan didn't like that.
An analysis of Rowan Davies' phone also shows that he had followed the couple when they went to bed.
What Will Valander and Kelly didn't know was that Brendan then, knowing that they were having sex in the room next door, got his phone out and started secretly videoing them having sex on his phone.
They said he was his arm put round the door kind of thing whilst he was filming that. He later deleted it. but this was a man who'd just been rebuffed by her with a laugh.
Will Vallender describes that he had left the house with Rowan Davies at 6:30 in the morning.
Will asked Brendan to make sure that the back door was locked, and Will would make sure that the front door was locked and post the keys back through. But we now know that Brendan didn't lock the back door, so he could gain entry when he come back.
CCTV then shows how Rowan Davies had made his way home, changed clothes, and returned to Kellyanne's house. The prosecution say he's armed with a knife and zip ties. He enters the house through the door he purposefully left unlocked.
It was quite clear that Rowan Davies had gone back there with a sinister intent.
When Rowan Davies led himself into the address, he crept upstairs and Kelly was likely to be asleep. And I think at that point he then held her at knife point and then tied her up and brutally beat her. He was obviously jealous that Will Vallender had sex with Kelly that night, and he decided it was his turn to go have sex with her. And she probably put up a fight, fought him off, and that's when he stabbed her.
In court, it's revealed that the knife wounds Kellyanne suffered were likely to be from an attempt to torture and control her.
When the pathologist gave evidence at the murder trial, he told how Kellyanne Case had suffered some horrific injuries, and he had to show sort of CGI reconstructions of these and stab wounds and slash wounds to her neck. She did also have broken ribs, broken bones in her body from what emerged at trial may have been a panicking Rowan Davies who tried to sort of revive her.
We did get told in trial that she would have felt it and it would have been very painful. She had multiple stab wounds from her chest to near her hips, just basically prodding her with a knife. And he cut her throat 7 to 10 times. It has played on my mind a lot, but she would have bled out really fast and she wouldn't have felt it after a couple of minutes because her whole body would have just gone numb.
The prosecution say that Rowan Davies then stripped the bed and used the bedding to set the house on fire. He then walked to his mother's house, where he changed into clothes he brought with him, and later goes to a nearby alley to burn the ones he had worn to kill Kellyanne. But he does keep one item, a pair of women's underwear.
And one might think this is possibly a trophy that Rowan Davies has kept as a result of this horrific crime. He had taken them believing that they were Kelly's when in fact they belonged to a friend.
Rowan Davies is cross-examined for 4 days, and his account of Kellyanne on the night before she died is one of concern.
He was talking about things like how he was consoling Kellyanne Case because she wanted to, according to Rowan Davies, sort of kill herself that night because her children had been taken away from her.
It's then disclosed to the jury that Rowan Davies had been convicted of burglary 2 years previously.
He'd actually gone into a Gosport mum's house, kind of barged his way into the door, and the mum and children had to barricade themselves in a bedroom upstairs. But when the mum and her children came out, they found a butter knife that was on the stairs. When he was arrested for it, he was telling the police that he had heard someone was burgling the house, and that's why he'd acted and gone in, painting himself as a good Samaritan. And it was so shockingly similar to his defence case in the murder trial that it wasn't him, it was somebody else. I think that was a really chilling moment in the trial.
But the defence have one final seed of doubt to cast. The account of the 3 men whom Kelly had said were threatening to break in, rape and strangle her just a day before she died.
There is this fly in the ointment, was these 3 unknown people that had allegedly threatened Kelly 24 hours before that, threatened to break into her house and sexually assault her, and we never identified those individuals. I would suggest they probably didn't exist and were part of Kelly's paranoia at that time. As laughable as his defence case statement was, what was concerning for me is that there is a fly in the ointment there, for want of a better word. And all the defence need is to cast reasonable doubt around the account that the police say had happened. And then Brendan Rowan Davis walks.
After 3 weeks of hearing the evidence, the jury retires to consider the case.
The courtroom is an emotionally charged area at the best of times, and when you know the jury are coming back with a verdict, everyone is on tenterhooks, waiting for that verdict, and you hope as a police officer it's going to go your way, and you hope for the family it's going to go their way as well.
The jury returns to the courtroom after 4 hours of deliberating.
After 16 days at trial, the jury came back unanimously with a guilty verdict of murder. And Rowan Davis was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment.
I was intently looking at Rowan Davies, and I saw him just sort of shaking his head as the foreman read out the guilty verdict.
When we found out that he was sentenced 30 years without parole, my family and me was happy that we got the justice for my sister, but it was never going to bring her back. I personally think that he is vile, he's disgusting, and I hope to God I'll never see him again. I think he's a very, very sick individual that should never ever be released.
I believe if you take a life like that and you murder someone so horribly, I think you take a life, you should serve life.
Yeah, life should be life, not 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is, or you can get out of good behaviour and stuff like that. Life should be life.
It doesn't seem like justice. She was young, she was only 27, and she would have had years and years with her children, so it doesn't seem just in what she's lost and what her children have lost in years and what he's getting for that, because he'll come out and he would be a middle-aged, late-aged man, and he can still do things with his life, and that's something that she'll never get the opportunity to do.
After 2 years, Kelly Ann's family are slowly coming to terms with their loss.
Us as a family have lost a big part, especially my mum and her children. They've lost their mum, and my mum has lost her daughter. Kelly was always the happiest and the kindest and the caring out of all of us. And I would always like her to be remembered for the person she was and not for what he did to her.
It was a massive shock to everybody. Things don't happen like that in a community like this.
People just couldn't believe it. Obviously it makes you scared.
You think, is there a serial killer on the loose? Is this gang related?
And I got a phone call, and then my world fell apart. They were new, but I didn't know there was anything wrong.
Just south of Manchester, at the start of the River Mersey, sits Stockport.
Well, there's a lot of history with Stockport. There's a church behind here that goes 16th century.
Stockport's quite a quiet town. I grew up there, I was born there, raised there, went to school there, and there was a sense of community and people rallying around. If anything happens, there's a lot of support there, and if you're from Stockport, people sort of stick together from there.
People are very friendly and very nice, very approachable.
On the outskirts of Stockport, nestled amongst the serene surroundings of a leafy country park, is Brinnington.
I think Brinnington's an absolutely fantastic place to live. Everybody is a big family. Everybody looks out for each other, and it is a very tight-knit community.
For those wanting an escape from the hustle and bustle of nearby Stockport, locals can soak up the nature in Reddish Vale Country Park.
The Vale, it's a lovely place. We used to go out, we used to climb up the trees. It's just a kid's wildest dreams, isn't it? You can do what you want when you're down the Vale.
You get quite a lot of people fishing down there. A lot of people down there with the dogs and running and things like that. It's lovely, it's really nice.
But the tranquility of this country park was shattered one summer's morning.
It was all in lockdown, and so my granddaughter, she used to walk the dog for us every couple of days. And one day she came back. She said, just going down, she said, there was a big bag of meat there, Gran. Like bin bag, and it was all ripped open. I said, oh, I said, you didn't let our dog touch it, did you? She said, no. I wouldn't let her touch it. She went trying to sniff at it, but I just pulled her back. She did. It didn't look very good. It was all green. She said, I think it was something from a butcher's. So, didn't think anything more about it.
But moments later, another dog walker grows suspicious.
Dog walkers came across the bin bags. They called into the police and reported, that these bags had been found.
Dog walker walking in here sees a black bag and the dog's worrying the black bag. As soon as they open it, they can smell the bad smell. It will be a case of, I think, of what do I do now? And I expect the thing is to ring the police.
Alerted to the scene by a putrid smell coming from the bags, police inspect them, only to make a horrific discovery.
They find this is a disposal of some body parts.
Having identified some human remains in the bags, police secure the scene, and a murder investigation is immediately launched.
So the police officer turns up to the scene, finds parts of a body. Straight away, they'll be thinking, preservation, let's get some specialist teams down here. They've got to then put a cordon in the area so that nobody can come in and take pictures and disturb the scene. Most police officers will have seen dead bodies, but it's an entirely different kettle of fish, isn't it, when you're seeing a body cut up.
News of the shocking discovery quickly spreads, and local reporters rush to the scene.
There was a massive sense of urgency with this. We cover a lot of murders in Manchester, but nothing like this. We were just trying to establish what had happened. All that we knew was that a body's been found, dismembered in bin bags in a country park. That was just, it was unbelievable at the time.
As the story spreads, the local community struggles to come to terms with what's been found on their doorstep.
It was a massive shock to everybody. Things don't happen like that in a community like this. How could somebody do that? It's absolutely horrific.
It rocked the community, the brutality of it. It shocked a lot of people.
People just couldn't believe it. Obviously it makes you scared, especially if it's just around the corner from where you live.
The shock of it just got about. It was more like when a rumour gets about. How do you drop a bag on the Vale with a human body in it? Do you know what I mean? It's what the psychos do.
News of the crime spreads fast, but the most important question on everyone's lips is, who is the victim?
The police will not know who that victim is at that moment. The family of that individual will not know that their loved one has died. So the police would have been looking at the missing persons register because it's important to try and get to the family of that individual as quickly as possible.
But there's a problem. The bags contain only certain body parts, making an initial identification impossible. And it spreads fear amongst families in the local community.
For the residents, it was a very, very difficult situation. You might have people whose parents, daughters, sons didn't come home for one reason or the other. So they were worried that it could have been their loved one.
The police have no idea who their victim is. and are no closer to knowing who could have possibly carried out this sickening crime.
The police will be trying to find the crime scene, because where the body is, the person has probably not been murdered there. They've just been parts of their body dumped there. You think, is there a serial killer on the loose? Is this gang related?
In the Stockport suburb of Brinnington, the community is waking up reeling after bin bags containing body parts were discovered in the local country park.
It's unusual to have a body dismembered. I can only think of 2 or 3 in my service in Greater Manchester.
Massive shock to everybody. You don't expect something like that to happen on your doorstep.
I've never heard anything like it before in my life. I couldn't believe it.
With the fears in the community growing, police specialists move in to examine the area.
There is an urgency taking place. It's like a huge juggernaut moving. They call it the golden hour, and it isn't an hour. It's the time that you're going to get the best evidence and the best opportunities to catch the killer and get main lines of inquiry. You will have police forensic teams sent out to the scene. You will have scientists looking at blood pattern analysis, looking at body deposition. The coroner from the area will be called out. So there's a whole group of people that are going to get involved in this from a very early stage.
News of the gruesome discovery has spread like wildfire, and local reporters are on the scene. But while forensic officers have the delicate task of trawling the crime scene, in a bid to identify the victim, the cause of death, and find clues to the killer, the media frenzy threatens to scupper the investigation from the off.
It's difficult for the police to keep ahead of the media frenzy. The media, they can be down and they can be knocking on doors in the area. They want to get in there and get the story.
We sent a reporter down there. We spoke to the community, we spoke to neighbours, and then we sent a photographer down there as well.
Photos from the scene are shared online, much to the concern of investigators.
When it got put on Facebook, that's how most people really did find out, through that.
One of the big issues for investigators at a crime scene like this is media and social media. Everybody wants to take photographs. Everybody wants to pass that out. It can be around the world, and let's say it takes 3 days to identify that individual because there's got to be some scientific analysis. Well, the family might have been looking at this for days on end.
With the images spreading online, time is running out before news gets to the family.
There's a number of ways that the police can try and identify an individual. It's been perfected over the years. You've got fingerprints, you've got tattoos, marks, you've got dental, you've got DNA.
Now we're into the phase of looking at that body in detail for marks, for injuries, things like that. As you carry on and dissect to look for evidence, this is all about the detail of what that body is telling you.
After examining the remains, experts find a tattoo on one of the body parts. Could this be key to identifying the victim? Then, suddenly, 9 hours after the discovery, police receive a call, reporting a local resident missing. She is 46-year-old Yvonne McCann, known as Vonnie.
The first thing, obviously, we realise that my sister's missing. And then the second thing we see on Facebook is that body parts have been found. So then you're putting 2 and 2 together, aren't you?
Yvonne's sister, Helen, had been watching the police drama unfold before her eyes, unaware of the devastating impact it was about to have on her life.
I sat in my garden looking at the police on the Vale, texting my sister. What's going on? It looks really bad. What's going on? Have you heard anything, Von? I didn't get any response, but I didn't think anything of it. Didn't even know she was missing.
Police request that one of Yvonne's family head to the scene to establish whether the victim is indeed their loved one or someone else entirely.
One of my nephews had been up to see a body part with a tattoo on it, so that proved that it was our Yvonne. was shocked. I was empty. I had no feelings. I didn't have a tear in my eye. I couldn't cry. I think I was just in disbelief and shock. The way we lost her, the way she was found, the indignity of being found like that.
Early hours of the morning, we'd gone to bed and I got a phone call off my brother Charlie saying they think that's our Yvonne. And then my world fell apart. I was meant to protect her. Never knew, but I didn't know. Didn't know there was anything wrong.
News that one of their own has been taken from them hits locals hard.
The whole community was subdued for a few weeks, to be honest, because everybody knew Vonnie. When you normally pass somebody and you say hi to and then suddenly they're not there to say hi to, it was very, very tragic, very tragic.
Yvonne was well known to locals, having lived in Brinnington her whole life.
She was the youngest, you know, she's the apple of my dad's eye, shall we say. She was a lovely girl. She's very mischievous. She was loud, she was bright, she had a great sense of humour, you know, and she was good fun to be with.
She was a baby. She got away with stuff that me and my brother never did. I think they give up. After me and my brother, they must have given up. She used to drive me nutty when we got to the teenage stage, and she used to run after me all the time, what rang about with me. She was just funny. I wish she could hang about with me now. But at the time, you don't think of that, do
you? During her teenage years, Yvonne found her first love with local lad Thomas McCann.
Yvonne and Thomas were definitely childhood sweethearts. She was about 14 when she met Tommy. From there, she was just always a Tom. Tom was the man.
She was 14 when she met him and he was a few years older. They were both devoted to each other.
A lot of people meet at a young age, and sometimes your first love is just your first love and you grow apart. Well, they never grew apart, they just grew stronger.
In 1996, 8 years into their relationship, Yvonne and Thomas tied the knot and started a family together.
Yvonne had 3 children with Thomas. They were married and Thomas was a family man, hard-working man. He worked as a takeaway delivery driver in Stockport.
She loved him to bits and he loved her. And they stayed together for all them years because there was a strong bond between them.
However, in 2012, after 24 years together, the relationship sadly came to an end. Yet Yvonne and Thomas remained friends and continued to live under the same roof. And eventually, Yvonne started dating again.
She moved on to a new relationship and things appeared to go well.
He's a nice bloke and he wanted to look after her. He made her feel good.
Life for Yvonne was good. But in March 2020, during the UK's period of lockdown, she moved back in with Thomas, who she was still on friendly terms with, in order to spend more time with her children. But in May 2020, just hours before a planned family barbecue, Yvonne texts family to say she's not coming, and then disappears, prompting her worried ex Thomas to take matters into his own hands.
At that point, Thomas reported that she was missing.
So what could possibly have led this well-known mother to be killed in such a horrific way?
When a body is dismembered, as an investigator, you've got to look at why it's been dismembered. So in this case, it's put in black bin liners and discarded on a park. It's not a case of trying to hide the body. That seems to me to be a knee-jerk reaction This person doesn't know what they want to do with the body. You know, this is not a criminal mastermind. This didn't look like some kind of serial killer. It's not gang related where they've taken some time, like you see on some of the films. It is a quick, hurried deposit of some body parts.
Police now begin to suspect that whoever was responsible for this sickening crime was local to the area.
One of the things I thought about on this is there's some science behind where criminals operate. You, I, everybody else will have an area where we operate a daily business. We'll go to the same pubs, we'll go to the same shops, we'll meet the same friends at the same locations. And if you look at that, this is how criminals operate. Because they'll carry out the crime, they'll know places where they feel that they can deposit stuff and they can get away and not be compromised.
With Yvonne's home a mere stone's throw from where her body was found, attention falls on her inner circle.
You want to be with the families very quickly. One, for that reassurance, but secondly, to identify, have they got any idea of how it occurred, who could have done it, or was it within the family? You want to look at possible partners, friends, and people that they've had arguments with. That gives me a smaller pool of people to look at than trying to look at every gang member in Greater Manchester to see whether they've killed this woman.
Police begin by speaking to Yvonne's ex-husband, Thomas McCann. Thomas tells police that he last saw Yvonne on the Saturday morning, 2 days before her body was found. She left home to meet her new partner. Detectives speak to him, but he tells them that Yvonne never turned up. And after some delving into his whereabouts on the day, police rule the new partner out of the investigation. So where had Yvonne gone, and who would want her dead?
We didn't know if she'd just had an argument and gone to her boyfriend. We didn't know if she'd had an argument and gone to see a friend. You know what I mean? We didn't know.
As Yvonne's family prepare to say their goodbyes, suddenly police make an announcement.
A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman's body was found on Reddish Vale Country Park earlier this morning. The suspect has been taken into custody and detained for questioning.
It was a big shock to everybody. Nobody ever expected it at all.
It's been a matter of hours since human remains were found in Brinnington, and the body has been identified as that of 46-year-old mum, Yvonne McCann, and police have made an arrest.
One of my nephews knocked on his door and says, I've come to tell you my dad's been arrested for a murder.
Yvonne's ex-husband, 49-year-old Thomas McCann, is arrested and taken into police custody.
It's unfathomable to even think something like that could happen.
And as Yvonne's loved ones try to make sense of this shocking news, the community rallies together to show its support.
Our family's a very well-known family. We're born and bred Brinnington, so it affected everybody. It wasn't just the family, the estate. It affected the estate. People couldn't believe it, you know, and the response, the messages of people, and we had lockdown here. We had lockdown. And even in lockdown, there must have been 300 people on this front. And by the way, they was all trying their best to stay safe. But how can you stop 300 people coming to show their respects?
Despite the incredible support from the local community, the interrogation of Yvonne's ex-husband Thomas in connection with her death continues. So what had led to the arrest of the father of 3 of Yvonne's children? Police had recently learnt that on Saturday morning, 2 days before Yvonne's body was found, there had been an argument between Yvonne and Thomas.
Yvonne and Thomas had argued in the morning. The neighbours had heard them arguing from about 9 o'clock.
They had an argument over a bag of chips, apparently.
She'd messaged her neighbour saying, you know, I've left a bag of frozen chips out, and that was that.
While in custody, Thomas tells police that after the argument over the frozen chips, Yvonne left their home to go and see her new partner. He then tells police the following day he was invited to a family barbecue.
Both him and Yvonne had been invited to a family barbecue by their son. And Yvonne, she'd messaged her son saying she wouldn't go, and there'd been an argument, and there was a few messages exchanged to do with that.
Yvonne's texts made it clear she didn't want to join Thomas at the barbecue, but he still went and stayed there until late in the evening.
He went to walk home. His daughter was helping him home because he was drunk. He passed out. And then that's when his daughter found the rings and, I believe, her mobile phone in his jacket pocket and began questioning where her mum was.
When confronted by his daughter, Thomas explains why he had Yvonne's possessions with him. And he gives a different story to the one he initially gave to the police.
After, you know, they'd had this argument, he said he met her on Hempshire Lane, which is in Stockport. He said he was going to give her a lift to the new partner's house, and during which she gave him her wedding rings for safekeeping, and that her phone had fallen into the footwell of his car, so he'd got those off her and then dropped her off at the new partner's house.
Her phone and rings were found in his pocket, so that heightens the sense of the SAO that this might be the individual we're looking at.
But the police still have no hard evidence to link Thomas to the crime.
I would be getting a search warrant for that property. You'd want to do a forensic examination in the home. One of the first things I'd be doing when I went in the house would be getting the bath and the plumbing looked at, because there'll be residue in the bath and there'll be residue in the pipes all the way down to the plumbing.
Officers searched Thomas and Yvonne's address, but forensics failed to find anything incriminating.
The house was spotless. From what I can gather, there was nothing found DNA-wise, there was nothing found there in the house that could prove that anybody had been killed in that house.
With no forensic evidence found at the address, police scour local CCTV in an attempt to confirm whether Thomas had indeed travelled to Stockport to meet Yvonne on the Saturday.
Thomas gives an explanation of where he went between certain times. The teams will look at any CCTV to see whether they confirm his story, because what you're trying to do is you're either trying to confirm or deny what he's saying.
And in a major breakthrough, police do uncover CCTV focusing on the street outside Yvonne and Thomas's home. But there's no sign of Yvonne leaving the address at any point. Despite Thomas's insistence to police that she'd walked out after the pair had argued over frozen chips.
It was 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning. He was seen going outside 4 times, moving things from his truck. Why he was doing that, we don't know. But then from about 10 o'clock, he was inside the house. And then he wasn't seen again until 4 o'clock.
Having spent the day indoors, Thomas McCann is seen leaving the address. But it's what he's seen carrying which really sparks police interest.
Thomas McCann left the house with bin bags.
Has Thomas been caught red-handed on CCTV carrying his ex-wife's remains? Further examination of the cameras shows Thomas returns home at 10:47 p.m. and heads out again just before 1 a.m. Shortly after leaving, his car is spotted on CCTV, parked at Bredbury Recycling Centre on the outskirts of Stockport. Police immediately dispatch officers to the scene.
It was at the recycling centre where more body parts were found.
The body parts are quickly identified as those of Yvonne McCann. Tools, including a Stanley knife, are also discovered at the scene. And Thomas is confronted with the damning evidence against him.
The officers have asked him the questions, he's given them an answer, they've gone away, they've come back and said, come on Thomas, that's not right. And here you are with a load of bin liners. What were you disposing of and where did you take them? People do become upset. A lot of them become angry because they're being found out. The story isn't right. The true craft of an interviewer is to get a person talking. If you can get that rapport going with that individual, you can get that little chink, you know, you need to do this for your kids, you need to do this for her. It can turn it. And that's the true craft of turning somebody to talk to you.
There was 4 police interviews. At the 4th interview, when he was accompanied by a solicitor, he handed in a statement saying, "I've killed my wife, I've killed Yvonne and disposed of her like garbage."
Thomas McCann is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Yvonne McCann.
You think, it's something that doesn't happen to you. It's something that doesn't happen in your family. It's something that happens in America. Do you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't happen in Brinnington. Something like that doesn't happen on your doorstep, and it definitely doesn't happen to your sister.
But the question troubling the police is the motive. Why would Thomas murder his childhood sweetheart and mother of his children? Four days since the human remains of Yvonne McCann were found in a park near the Stockport suburb of Brinnington, the community wakes to the shocking news that her ex-husband, 49-year-old delivery driver Thomas McCann, has confessed to her murder.
Yvonne and Thomas were childhood sweethearts, which I think makes it all the more surprising that this happened, really.
He's not only killed his wife, he's also mutilated her body as well. How anybody could do that, I'll never know.
Ten months after Yvonne's murder, Thomas appears at Manchester Crown Court to enter a formal plea. And the question the family are desperate to be answered is, why did Yvonne's once-loving husband end her life in such a brutal way? Could it really be over a bag of frozen chips?
This was the first that anyone had heard the proper details of the case, and it was the first time in open court that the public would hear of the details of the case, so it was a very tense atmosphere. There was the family sat upstairs in the public gallery at the back, and then Thomas McCann in the dock. Thomas seemed really normal when I saw him in court. He was in a blue suit, he looked quite smart. You wouldn't look at him to think he'd done something like that, but you could say that about any murderers, couldn't you?
My side of the family, we weren't in the same courtroom because of COVID. We wasn't allowed. We was by camera.
I never went to court. I didn't want him to see me, because if he sees me and I show any emotion at all, he's won.
Thomas formally pleads guilty to the murder of his ex-wife, meaning he wouldn't have to give a defence revealing any motive for the killing.
I think Thomas pleaded guilty to stop his family from hearing all the gory details of what went on. That way he didn't have to tell his side of the story.
He knew that a few of the family were going to go to court, so he pleaded guilty, so there wasn't a court case. No one even had a say on the matter.
With Thomas pleading guilty to the crime, the family is denied hearing a motive for the murder. Could the answer lie in their 24-year relationship, which started when they met as teenagers?
I think she just fell head over heels with him. And I think, oh, this is a fairy tale. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Every couple of months we used to say, oh, is Thomas still at home? Going off with every woman he set eyes on. And she'd forgive him over and over and over again.
No matter what you said to her, Bonnie, she wouldn't believe it. My Thomas wouldn't do that. My Thomas wouldn't do that.
Over the years, the strain of the relationship took its toll on Yvonne. she reached out to her brother and sister for help.
We all said, it'll never be no good. And she used to just fall to pieces. And we used to pick the pieces up. And in the end, you know, you can't keep saying, leave him, because it doesn't work. She had to be ready to do that.
My sister come round, our Yvonne, and said, you know, can you go and chuck him out, or can you go and have a word with him, can you sort it out? Now, I used to do that for her. Nothing ever involved violence, just strong talking. But you knew you was wasting your time, because within a day or two, he'd be back. So after maybe 10 years of actually trying to sort it out, I did say to our Yvonne, you know, if you have trouble now, don't come to see me. When you want him gone, get him gone yourself.
Yvonne remained with Thomas. But as the years rolled on, she became more and more vulnerable.
She was a very mentally strong person, don't get me wrong, but, you know, as time went on, she got weaker and weaker as things went wrong. You know, dogs dying, parents dying. When my mum died, she believed a lot in ghosts, our Yvonne, and afterlife. She used to go and see psychics and things like that. All of a sudden, all sorts of little things are moving around. You've got all your ornaments and things like that are moving around. Things are appearing from nowhere. And Yvonne's thinking, it's my mum and my dad, you know. And it wasn't my mum and dad, it was Thomas messing around with her head. I think that's exactly what he was doing.
As far as I'm aware, there was nothing physical. There was no physical abuse, but there was something. I think it was like mental torture to her.
Eventually, in 2012, Yvonne built up the strength to end her relationship with Thomas.
She'd had enough, and she wanted out. So she moved out, she moved away from the trouble.
Yvonne then met her new partner. But despite this, Thomas kept a tight grip on Yvonne.
Thomas wouldn't let go. You know, he'd threaten to jump off bridges, things like that. If you don't stay with me, I'm going to jump off this bridge. If you don't stay with me, I'm going to drink this bleach. If you don't stay with me, I'm going to take these tablets.
He was stood on the bridge numerous times near where she lived, threatening to jump. He went disappearing one time. He just disappeared. And then he turned up again. And I think it was constant mind games.
Despite recently moving in with her new partner, Yvonne, concerned over Thomas's well-being, felt she had no choice but to move back in with her ex-husband.
She went back, but she didn't want to be there. She wanted that fresh start. She wanted that fresh start, and she wasn't allowed that fresh start. She couldn't get rid of him. He wouldn't go. That is what happened towards the end.
In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the UK, and a national lockdown meant that Yvonne and Thomas would be spending more time together than usual.
All of a sudden, you're stuck in the same house together for months. It's going to have effects on some people. For our Yvonne to be spending all that time with Thomas, I don't think it would have been a good thing, you know.
2 months into lockdown, Yvonne pays her brother a visit, which tragically would be the last time he saw her.
The last time I spoke to her was the Thursday before she was murdered. She come round the house, and Yvonne was talking to my wife and saying, you know, he's going through my phone, and I wake up in the night or in the morning, he's sat at the end of the bed looking at me. She said, I don't feel comfortable. She knew herself that there was something not right with him. And in that conversation, she actually said to me that if I am ever found dead, it's him that's done it. And that was words out of her mouth the Thursday before the day she disappeared. If I am ever found dead, it's him that's done it.
Days later, on the morning of Saturday the 23rd of May 2020, a neighbour hears an argument coming from Yvonne and Thomas's home. They then receive a text from Yvonne saying the pair were arguing over frozen chips being left out. But was this really the motive for the murder?
All I can think is that he'd lost control of her. Maybe they had the conversation and she said, well, I am going. Maybe that's what triggered it off. Maybe she decided, right, Tom, I'm going, and he thought, well, you're not going anywhere. Makes more sense to me than arguing over a bag of chips. Certainly does. He's the only one that knows.
The motive may be unclear, but police discover what Thomas did next. And it's truly horrifying.
He strangled Yvonne, and then we believe using a Stanley knife and some lopping shears, he dismembered a body. I think that's what took so long for him to do. That's why he was in the house for so long.
Police also discover that after killing his ex-wife, Thomas had used Yvonne's phone pretending to be her.
So whilst he was dismembering Yvonne's body, he was messaging the family using her phone, messaging himself using her phone and replying. He was apologising to her about the bag of frozen chips, telling her he still loved her. All this was carried on whilst he was committing that act.
So he's trying to manufacture a narrative there, so that when he's asked questions, say, oh, well, I was speaking to her at these times, and then these are the messages, and if she's died before then, well, she died afterwards.
The court hears that in a prepared statement, McCann had told police he had strangled Yvonne and cut her body up in order to make her go away. He then disposed of her body parts and the tools he had used, and then shockingly joined his family for a barbecue that his son had invited both parents to attend the next day.
He didn't show any remorse. How can that be remorseful? Just carrying on after he'd murdered and dismantled my sister. Carrying on like he'd done nothing. Or just go and have a barbecue with my family. Just carry on pretending I'm my wife on her phone. No, that wasn't sorry. He can say sorry as much as he wanted in court to the family. That shows me he was never sorry.
The court is also told that only 50% of Yvonne's body has ever been found.
Other parts of the body were still not found. They've not found the head.
The family will never get complete closure in that aspect until she's returned as a whole. There's always that part of my loved one is still out there, and hopefully one day it'll be found.
On the 30th of March 2021, the judge imposes his sentence. Thomas McCann is sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 12 years behind bars.
My side of the family just got up and walked out. I was gobsmacked.
There was a number of things which reduced the sentence. Part of it was reduced due to his guilty plea. Another part was due to mitigating circumstances such as his mental state at the time. He had mental health issues. There was alcohol abuse there. From what we know, he suffered with horrendous abuse as a child in every way imaginable. But you'd think a brutal murder like that, the way he disposed of the body, you know, people who've murdered people in the past have got much higher sentences for doing a lot less than what he did.
What's that message about that 12 years sent out to other people that are thinking of getting rid of the wife because they've had enough of her? Eh? Can't afford to divorce her, can't do this, I'll murder her. I'll only get 12 years. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. They should be ashamed of themselves.
I could never forgive him. Never. He took my sister away. He took a part of me away with him that day, and a part of my brother as well.
I could never forgive him. for what he's done to not just me, the family. It's what he's done to everybody. It's up to him now to do something with himself. It's up to him to realise what he's done and let him do his time. But when it comes to forgiveness, no, I can't forgive the man. No, I can't. No.
With Thomas now behind bars, the community of Brinnington struggles to come to terms with the horror of what happened to Yvonne.
The neighbours, everybody, even now still feel it. Because obviously, you know, children left without a mum, and it's just thrown their life, probably for the rest of their lives, into turmoil. Very, very sad, very sad.
And Yvonne's elder siblings are slowly coming to terms with a life without her.
The way of moving on is to keep yourself busy. Don't let things get into your head. We're not going to let him destroy my life, my wife's life, my family's life, my kids' life. We're not going to let him do it. We're going to get on and we're going to be even stronger. And that's how you get through things.
I'll never be able to understand why she's no longer here. And the nightmares, the constant lack of sleep since, wondering who she was shouting for while he was strangling her, because she'd have been shouting for somebody to help her. And we didn't, and we couldn't, because we didn't know.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this programme, help is available online at sky.com/viewer support.